Hi there, Booktube. It's Roz, and it's very nearly the end of June, close enough to the end of June for me to feel that it's okay to do the mid-year freak-out book tag. Now, the original perpetrator of this tag has sort of disappeared into the mist of time, but it's a great one to do on an annual basis, and I was very appreciative of being tagged by Faye of Faye's Parallel Stories, which sort of gave me the extra impetus to do it. So thank you, Faye. The name of this tag always makes me laugh a little, because, mid-year freak-out book tag. And do you know what it makes me think of? And this is going to date me, and if you recognise this reference, it will you too. Le Freak by Chic, which is a track that was a hit in 1978, and the refrain of that is "freak out." And so I'm earwormed by this tag. Brilliant track. Nile Rodgers and Bernie Evans. Anyway, wrote it. But let's get down to some books. And prompt number 1 is the prompt that I find the most difficult in the whole of this tag, because it's the best book you've read so far this year. Well, I've read 69 books so far this year, and that meant I had about 20 of those were potential contenders for best book. Impossible. Usually when I do my end of the year roundup, I sort of put things into categories to give myself a bit more leeway. But in the end, I went for an older book, a backlist book, which I read for May of the Moderns, and that was A Voyage in the Dark by Jean Rhys, which was written in 1934. And I picked that because Jean Rhys just writes a perfect sentence, on the sentence level as well as the book level. That is just spot on as a book. Prompt number 2 could have been impossible for me, but until I remembered something. So it's the best sequel you've read so far this year. Well, I thought I hadn't read any sequels. I don't read a lot of series or sequels. That's unusual for me. But then I remembered that right at the very beginning of the year, I read a sequel, and luckily it was a good one, because it was book 3 in the Peter Posthumous sort of Amsterdam murder mystery series. Book 3 is called Deadly Secrets, and that series is by Booktube's own Britta Boller and Robert Bolt, her collaborator for those. So great fun. I really hope that this could be a book 4 or a book 5. It's been a while, so I wonder. Prompt number 3 is new release you've not read yet but want to. And happily, I already have a copy of the new release that I haven't read yet but want to. And that's, there's probably others, but, this is the one that came to mind. It's because I just got it from the library. It's The House of Doors by Tan Tuang Eng, a Malaysian author, writes in English, so don't need to name a translator. I read his book, The Garden of Evening Mists, in 2011 or 2012, soon after it came out. It was one of my absolute favourite books of the year that I read it, and it's stuck in my mind ever since, and I've been looking forward to him bringing out another book, and it's been more than a decade, so this really is a very much anticipated book for me. Set in Malaysia, this, and involving Somerset Maugham. Sounds fascinating. I'm really looking forward to it. Prompt number 4 is the most anticipated release in the second half of the year for you. Now, I don't tend to do that thing of sort of watching what's going to come out and looking forward to reading it. I tend to wait until things are out and there are reviews and they capture my interest. Having said that, I have read that there's a new book coming out by David Diop, I don't know how recently he wrote it, but newly translated, coming out this autumn. And he wrote At Night All Blood is Black, which was a scary, disturbing, beautifully written stunner of a book for me. And so I will say that I'm looking forward to that one. Now, problem number 5 is your biggest disappointment of the year. And this, for me, was Twilight of Torment by Leonora Miano, translated by Gila Walker. Now, I buddy read this with Sean and in February, I think, and we were really keen to buddy read this book because we discovered that we both absolutely loved her book, Season of the Shadow, which I thought was a superb book. So I was so looking forward to reading this one, Twilight of Torment. And it was actually a bit disappointing. I mean, it wasn't a terrible book, but it was just my levels of anticipation had been so high, and I really struggled with it. It was one of those books where you could see her purpose, and her purpose was wonderful, but it just, it was too messagey. You know, she let her valuable ideas almost outweigh the rest of the sort of literary quality of the book, and it was doubly a disappointment because I was really looking forward to a buddy read with Sean, and in fact we were a bit sort of like, we didn't DNF it, but you know, or perhaps he did, maybe he probably did before the end, but you know, we got through a lot of it and I read all of it. Anyway, there we go. Number 6 is naturally your biggest surprise of the year. Now, I've had a few good surprises this year, one way or another, like, you know, Pod, you know, book about dolphins and whales and things, and you know, I hate books with animal protagonists, and I you know, actually I really quite enjoyed it. You know, it wasn't a 5-star book, but you know, it was decent. So I could list loads, but the one I'm going to pick, was a novella about a kayak and a lightning strike. How would I have known that would be one of my 5-star favourite books of the year so far? And it absolutely was, and that's Cove by Kynan Jones, and I read that in March for Deweython, the Welsh Readathon, so thank you, Kieran, for suggesting that one. Problem number 7 is your favourite new author, either a debut author or new to you. Well, I don't think that an author can be a favourite author on the strength of one book for me. You know, there's another whole video about that a few people have made, isn't there, that I might make one of these days. You know, what does something have to, how does something get to be a favourite author? You know, what is the eligibility criteria? However, if I think about what have been my favourite debuts of the year, it's been just a brilliant half year for debut authors and debut novels. Let's think. Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Loved that book. What else did I really, really love? Tom Crew, The New Life. Wonderful book, fascinating, maybe not 5-star book, slightly flawed, but so good. You know, I could just keep reading them off, couldn't I? But the one I've picked is For Thy Great Pain Have Mercy on My Little Pain by Victoria Mackenzie. British author. It's her debut novel. I read it when it was sort of newly out in February, I think. It's set in Norwich in 1413, and it's a very short, intense book about 2 amazing medieval women, Marjorie Kemp and Julius of Norwich, and a sort of interaction between them, but giving you then their sort of, just conjuring up their whole personalities and their lives. And yeah, wonderful. I really look forward to reading more by Victoria Mackenzie if she gets to write more. And let's hope she doesn't keep me waiting, 10 years like Tan Tuan Eng. Problem number 8 is one that people always struggle with, or certainly in our bit of Booktube, because it's your newest fictional crush. And, what does that mean? But I realised that I kind of do have one this year. Okay. And my newest fictional crush is the fictionalised version of St Cuthbert in Cuddy by Benjamin Myers. Now, which I read, it came out in March, I think, and I read it in April. Cuddy is the nickname for St Cuthbert, and reading that book, at the beginning of the book, you get Cuddy himself, and then the spirit of Cuddy kind of infuses the rest of the book. And I came away from that book feeling I could do with a bit of Cuddy, St Cuthbert in my life. So my newest fictional crush, a 8th century British saint. Why not? Prompt number 9 is your newest favourite character. That's a little bit easier, isn't it? Many, many temptations. I was half tempted by a minor character in New Life by Tom Cruise, the wife of the main protagonist. There's something about her that spoke to me. A couple of main female protagonists that, again, are contenders for this for me was the central character in Amina Khan's Indelicacy and in Han Kan's Greek lessons, both slightly uneasy characters, I suppose. But the one, when I thought about it, that it just had to be was Boulder. And Boulder is the eponymous title character in Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated from the Catalan by Julia Sanchez. And Boulder she is bold and not always likeable, but yet also, I don't know, vulnerable and tender and, yeah, someone that I would love to have as a friend or even, as a partner. Yeah, great character. Do read it if you haven't read that book. Prompt number 10 is the book that made you cry or the saddest book that you've read this year. The book that made me cry was The Colony by Audrey McGee. That has quite a tear-jerky ending, but I didn't feel manipulated by the ending. I mean, it's a moving book that comes to an unavoidably and appropriately moving finale that did bring a tear to my eye. It's an Irish book. Trespasses by Louise Kennedy is another book by an Irish author that kind of moistened my eyes, I would say, and actually a third, Sebastian Barry, Longest Journey. Goodness me, that what is it about Irish novelists that managed to sort of bring the tears to my eye? But the saddest book I read this year, I didn't cry, but was definitely the saddest book overall, was Iep Jaltok, Poems from a Marshallese Daughter. I made a video about that a couple of weeks ago. It's a book of poems by a writer who's from the Marshall Islands, and it's really about the appalling treatment that the Marshall Islands have had over the 20th and 21st century. And I was reading just in the paper today about the Pacific Islands, the threat to their nationhood of climate change as, oceans rise and storm surges happen, and, that places like the Marshall Islands and Tuvalu and others could just, disappear. So very moving book to read. Prompt number 11 is books that made you happy. There are 3 books that made me happy, not necessarily because they were happy books. None of them were sort of deeply unhappy books, but that made me happy to read because they were 3 books that I read by booktubers. And in January, I read Our Doris by Charlie Heathcott. That did make me happy because it definitely made me laugh. In April, I read The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden, which made me enormously happy because I feel like we've kind of lived with Katie through the birth of that novel, and what a stunner it was. And then just this month, I read Death of the Author by Mark Nash, and Mark's books are so intellectually stimulating. So all 3 made me happy because I was reading things by fellow booktubers. Prompt number 12 is the most beautiful book that you acquired this year. Okay, and had a few sort of possibilities, but I went for this one, which I picked up just the other day. It's the Sonnets of William Shakespeare, as you can see, a Royal Shakespeare Company edition. And why is it a beautiful book? Because look at that lovely, lovely calligraphy. I mean, what could be nicer than reading a Shakespeare sonnet written out for you like that? And I picked this up because I've heard, a little bird has told me that Too Tight-Lautrec's Sonetarium may be reopening soon, and more sonnets to enjoy with Too Tight. Yes. Prompt number 13 is your favourite book to screen adaptation. And I'm not going to talk about a favourite book to screen adaptation. I am going to talk about my unfavourite book to screen adaptation so far this year, which was the BBC's new version of Charles Dickens's Great Expectations. Now, Great Expectations has been sort of done again and again on screen. Why? Because, it's got these really kind of vivid characters. It's got some amazing scenes, some very sort of cinematic scenes. It's got great plot twists. There's a bit of mystery. You can see why people want to make films and TV series of it. But why they made this one, heaven only knows. Because, in making a film or a TV series of a Dickens novel, that's as long and as rich as Great Expectations, the issue should be what to take out. And instead, they just bunged a load of complete rubbish in just to make, try and make it contemporary or something. But you don't need to, because, there's contemporary ideas in Dickens anyway. I don't know. So, hated it. There we go. Got that out of my system. Prompt number 40 is your favourite video or favourite review that you've done this year. I think my favourite video to make was In Praise of Short Books, which I made in March, just because I really enjoyed the reminding myself of the novellas and short novels that I love to make that video. But perhaps my favourite review, of a single book that I did this year was the review of The Five by Hallie Rubenhild, which was our group read for People April. And that was lovely to make, just because I got to draw on the Voxer group discussion that we had for the group read. So that was a special pleasure. Prompt number 15, and the last prompt, is books you need to read by the end of the year. Now, the standard response to that prompt is to say, well, I don't need to read anything, because, it's all about what you want to read and enjoying reading. And that is true. But there are some books that I suppose, there are many, many books that I want to read in the second half of the year. And I hope to read, at least another 69 or more. But there are some books that I do feel I need to read because I've committed to them one way or another. One of those is Absalom by William Faulkner, which is our this year's Faulkner in August choice. And so if you're thinking ahead for August, think about joining us reading Absalom. It's meant to be one of his sort of, top tier novels, and I'm looking forward to that. So that's a need to read. Another need to read for me is this one, Tomb of Sand by Gitanjali Shree. Translated by Daisy Rockwell, and that's a need to read because I've committed to a buddy read of this for Women in Translation Month in August with Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads. So, I must read it. I need to read more books by authors from a country where I've never read an author from that country before. I've read one a month so far this year. I just read a book by an author from the Central African Republic. I'll do a Scally Dandling video about that because it was actually a jolly good book. The next one I need to read is A Spare Life by Lydia Dimkowska. I was going to read that in June, but I've moved it to July for Booktube at War because it's sort of at the time of the Yugoslav conflict. So that's 3 things, have I said, that I need to read. I will also feel a bit silly, I think, if I don't get to read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver by the end of the year. I'm going to say that now to kind of help make sure I do it, because it keeps winning prizes, and I got hold of it before it even did. And I actually read David Copperfield, the Dickens novel that it's based on, last year, almost in readiness for it. So it would be crazy not to. There we go. That's my need to read. Oh, the other thing, that was the one that I definitely have to read, is a book by a Portuguese author, because I'm one of the co-hosts of the Women's World Cup readathon that we're doing sort of late July and into August, and we've all got a country. It's not too late to join in if you would like to. Leave a message and I'll tell you how. But I'm going to start by reading The Migrant Painter of Birds by Lydia George, translated by Margaret Jewel Costa, great translator, I love her, because Portugal is my first team. So I've got to read a Portuguese book. There we go. Now, I'm not going to actually tag anyone because I feel this is a tag that you should do if you want to do and not if you don't. But I am going to take the chance to kind of give a shout out to a few booktubers, at least one of which I think has already done the tag, in fact. So Priscilla of An Evening Reader, Kit the Reader, and Angelia, that's right, get it right, of Read and Reread. I think she's already done the tag. Melinda of A Web of Stories, and Faye, who tagged me in this book, of Faye's Parallel Stories. And those are all channels that I've come to relatively recently, so nice to give them a shout.